The State of Crypto is presented by Tron, connecting the world to the power of cryptocurrency.
Senators Cynthia Lummis and Kirsten Gillibrand had just relaunched an updated version of their landmark crypto legislation. Joining us now is Timothy Massad, former CFTC chairman and current director of the Digital Assets Policy Project at Harvard Kennedy School. Welcome back, Tim. Great to see you back on the show.
Great to see you, Emily and Len and Jen. Thank you.
Always great to have you, especially at this moment in time. So lots to talk about with you. You just co-wrote another great piece in the Wall Street Journal. We'll get to that in a moment. But let's talk about this bill for a second. There was an earlier version of this bill, right? Now this is a new relaunch version. Can you just break down for us in the way that I know you're very good at doing? What's important here? What does this bill say? What are the implications? What's the main takeaway from this bill?
Well, Senators Lummis and Gillibrand are trying to offer comprehensive legislation to deal with a number of issues, both how we regulate the spot market, how we define what is subject to the jurisdiction of the SEC and the CFTC. They've made proposals on stablecoins. They've made proposals on taxation. So there's a lot in here. We're all still getting through it and understanding how it's changed from the previous version. I congratulate them for getting this out there. I must say, though, I don't see much appetite in Congress right now for building a consensus around something basically as large as this. I think as we move into the election year, the election cycle, it's just going to be very hard to build that kind of consensus. But, we'll see.
So, Tim, you actually just touched on exactly what I was going to ask you, which is that I don't see Congress just basically doing anything on crypto before the election. I mean, forget building consensus, like anything at all. And I think, but that's kind of the key thing here, right? Because this bill, as far as, it requires Congress to act, right? Sure. I guess the question is and this is just true for all those crypto proposals out there. It's like they require Congress to act. Nobody seems to really believe that anyone in Congress is going to put any political capital into this before the election. So, where does that leave us? And I'm kind of curious what that means also for some of the things that you're proposing.
Sure. Well, I think the underlying issue here is there's such a wide range of opinion about what to do. There are those who they were skeptical about crypto before, and the FTX failure and the other failures we saw last year have made them even more skeptical and critical. And so they are very opposed to doing anything that they think would legitimize the sector more than it should be legitimized, or curb the power of the SEC and the CFTC. They, I think, are fully supportive of the SEC's enforcement actions as well as the CFTC's. Then you've got those, who do believe in the innovative potential of the technology and want to try to do something to clarify what the rules are. But again, I think you're right, Emily. I don't really see anything happening. The one area where I'm still maybe somewhat hopeful is stablecoins, only because I think our hand is going to be forced sooner or later on doing something on stablecoins because other jurisdictions are moving to set up crypto regimes, but in particular, where they're setting up regimes to allow stablecoins, you could have stablecoins launched from offshore, even dollar-based stablecoins, and I think that might cause us to say, hey, we really need to move forward.
We'll definitely get to stablecoins, but I got to ask, how much of a hand did you have in this particular piece of legislation? Because this reads a lot like they've been reading their Tim Massad.
Well, look, I've encouraged anyone who'll listen to me to take the approach that I've been advocating, which is let's try to do something incremental. Let's not rewrite the securities laws. And, this is what former SEC Chair Jay Clayton and I said just recently that you referred to in the Wall Street Journal. Our approach is, look, enforcement is important. We're very supportive of enforcement. But, our concern is the recent cases brought by the SEC and the CFTC aren't going to bring us to sort of comprehensive investor protection standards quickly. And that's really for two reasons. One is that litigation takes a long time. And frankly, some in the crypto industry may decide they have an interest in stretching out the litigation because business as usual can continue. And also because it can't really decide some of the questions we need to decide. So we've advocated an incremental approach, which if Congress would adopt it, that would be really great. I think it's an easier thing for Congress to adopt than a lot of these other measures. And that is that the SEC and the CFTC, through a self-regulatory organization, would develop some basic standards and apply those to the platforms as they exist.
And that's why I asked if you had some role in this, because I know that was something you've been championing. Did they call you? Did they email you? Did they text message?
I've talked with their staff and suggested this approach to them and explained it and gave some other reactions, some concerns. I do get very concerned about the efforts to kind of redefine the securities law. I realize people don't like the fact that this is it's a complicated definition that's based on some old cases, but it's worked well for us, number one. And number two is we don't really have the information sometimes to decide even whether a token is a security. So I think we've got to put in some kind of basic disclosures and focus on that rather than trying to rewrite the law.
Tim, you brought up the SRO. It's mentioned in this bill. Like you said, it's something that you've spoken about at length in the past. Can the SEC and the CFTC really work together, given how we've seen things kind of play out with both agencies, with various different crypto companies? Is this something that's actually plausible to achieve this ideal state, I guess?
Sure. I think they can. Look, our regulatory agencies often just work as independent actors. That's certainly true. But I think they can. And certainly if Congress were to say that this is what they want, then they would have to do it. And that's why I say, our approach could really be carried out through very, very simple legislation that wouldn't rewrite the law, wouldn't change the SEC and the CFTC's powers. And that's why I think it could appeal to those who both are concerned about restricting the SEC's powers, but also those who, do want to see some greater clarity here.
So, Tim, I guess just to kind of go back to this earlier question, though, it's like, but how do we actually gain the momentum to do this? Because yes, like your prescriptions are incremental, they're reasonable, but it won't. But like, it still requires action, and it still requires like somebody in Congress or enough people in Congress to actually make this a priority. And like, I guess that's something that I'm just trying to figure out. Like, how do we get there?
Yeah, it does require that. You never know with Congress. We've often discounted the possibility of things moving and then suddenly something does move. But also the agencies could do this on their own. We believe the agencies could implement this plan on their own. So, that would require the chairs to decide to do it. And again, we view it as a parallel track to litigation, not, we're not, or enforcement. We're not saying this replaces that. We're strongly supportive of enforcing the laws.
You said it's unlikely we see much movement here before the next election. When do you think that we could see some movement on this?
Well, obviously post-election, there might be an opportunity there. And again, I haven't given up on something happening pre-election. You never know. But and that's why, I always advise people, well, just be ready, be ready for the moment when the, political winds are such that we might be able to move forward. And, that's partly what, Jay and I are trying to do by advocating this and by talking to people on the Hill to suggest it and help them think through how it would work. Beyond that, I can't really make any predictions, Jen, as to when something would happen. The one example I often point to, though, is, in the midst of kind of the years after the financial crisis, we were focused on developing the Dodd-Frank legislation. And, the crowdfunding legislation kind of came out of nowhere and passed, and that surprised a lot of people. So, you never know what's possible.
So, getting to the topic of stablecoins, do you think that this, the way it would be structured here, would require a lot more work on the part of the banks? I mean, like, what are we looking at, and how receptive would banks be to that? I mean, is there any incentive on their part to get a stablecoin going?
Well, Louis, I think the big issues on stablecoins are these. One is, is it going to just be banks or non-banks that are, chartered and their activities are restricted, but they're essentially, narrow banks or payment entities. And I think there's an increasing support for that. The second issue, though, is what is the role of the states in authorizing those entities versus the Fed? I think you've got some Democrats who very much want to make sure we have consistent federal standards here. And then you've got, some in the Republicans who would like to see a state chartering option. They believe that's consistent with our dual banking system. So the question is, how do you bridge that? Can you have state chartering with some overlay of minimal federal standards? Or, one idea I've suggested is that those federal standards kick in, federal requirements administered by the Fed, those would kick in if a stablecoin issuer wants to have access to the federal payments infrastructure. If it wants to get a master account at the Fed, or if the dollar amount of the stablecoin is above a certain level. I think those two things might be a way to bridge the gap on that point. But from what I hear from talking to people, it sounds like that issue is one of the critical ones.
Tim, I just want to go back to your op-ed for a second. So, one thing, and pardon me if I missed something, but I think like one of the critical issues here, and the basic issue, and one of the reasons why Coinbase is being sued, is because there isn't a consensus on what is a security and what is a commodity. And I guess I don't feel like your op-ed specifically addresses that as much, unless I missed something. So I guess like, how do you deal with that issue, right? Because like until that issue is resolved in the U.S., I feel like this kind of thing is just going to keep happening.
No, that's exactly, we're kind of saying the opposite. We're very deliberately saying we don't have to resolve that issue in order to put in place some basic investor protection standards. We're not saying that's not an important issue. It is. And I don't want to, limit the SEC's ability to say this is a security you really got to comply. But what we're saying is, look, we have platforms today that are trading things. Maybe they're securities, maybe they're not securities, maybe they're commodities. What we're saying is put in place investor protection standards on protecting customer assets, preventing fraud and manipulation, prohibiting conflicts of interest, requiring reporting and recording of information. You can put those in place today for anything these platforms are trading. Now, the question is, what's the jurisdictional reach? Where that's where Congress could say any platform that's trading Bitcoin or Ethereum today has to comply with these standards, which we want the SEC and the CFTC to develop. If you say that this applies to platforms that are trading Bitcoin or Ethereum, you're going to get the entire market, right? There's no platform out there that's, significant, that's not trading most likely both of those tokens. So that's the hook. That's the way to say, here are the intermediaries that these standards apply to without having to resolve what's a security and what's not a security. We're going to say, look, that can still be litigated. And what we're saying is, let's require these platforms to provide some basic disclosure on a token before it's listed for trading. And that actually will help us determine what's a security. You can't really answer what's a security unless you know, is there a common enterprise still behind this? Are there managerial efforts that, people are looking toward to increase its value? We need disclosure to figure that out.
All right, Tim, we're going to leave it there. Thanks so much for joining the show. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
That was Timothy Massad, former CFTC chairman and current director of the Digital Assets Policy Project at the Harvard Kennedy School.